Okay, I'm going to demonstrate a few different ways to approach portraiture. And I'm going to first start by laying in a quick gesture sketch. I'm going to post my reference that I'm looking at. It's just a still from a Jurassic Park movie, right, as the portrait reference, but I'll post that into a different section of Canvas. But with the video, I'm going to just sketch out roughly how I like to approach gesture drawing. And again, when you're working with gesture drawing, remember it's that map or guideline. It helps not to hold your pencil maybe like you normally would, but holding it further back on your tool. It just gives you more freedom to kind of really work through figuring out where everything's aligned, right? So what you can do, something I like to do, is kind of quarter my paper, at least just trying to lay in that rough grid, especially when you're working from a digital photograph. That's something you can do digitally as well, just kind of map in a little grid. But it kind of gives me a little bit more to work from as I start to lay in the direction of the head, right? So I'm going to work very general to specific. This does not look anything like the portrait that I'm going to eventually end up doing, but just to kind of lay in and looking for some key elements. So in this portrait, the character is wearing a hat, right? If you've never seen Jurassic Park, it's Dr. Alan Grant. So he's wearing a hat, right? And then I'm also going to figure out the axis line. So the main axis line of the figure. So if you're kind of looking straight on, you have that kind of plus section where the eyes are that middle point of the head, and then that vertical axis that cuts down through the nose. But when you have any kind of tilt, difference in perspective, you have to change how this plus appears. And because the reference photo isn't looking directly at me, I'm going to kind of adjust my plus accordingly. Again, always kind of looking at my reference. And so I don't see all the top of the head. I know this is a little too long, but it gives me a good basis point, right? And I'm going to kind of add in some of the shirt and shoulders here just briefly, right? Kind of work in a little bit of the neck just to kind of get a sense of the overall placement, right? So I am drawing pretty much to scale that I see the image as far as like the proportions, but I'm definitely going to change this. And you can see that I've prepped similar kind of gesture sketches on my other few pages, right? Because I'm going to demonstrate a couple different techniques. When you're working through this portrait assignment, where I'm asking you to kind of go through different ways of working, please feel free to kind of prep all of your gesture sketches first, right? So you kind of get into that practice of drawing the same thing over and over before you move into the other techniques. Obviously you can erase, right, and kind of make adjustments, but it's really more just about the process of kind of learning. So you're welcome to kind of just leave it as is. The first one I'm going to start with is a continuous line drawing, right? So I'm going to start working in without picking up my pencil, which I know is a little always tricky for all of us. I'm going to kind of readjust this chin line here where I got down too far and kind of work section to section, mapping in the key features of the face, right? When you're working too with portraiture, it can be helpful to kind of lay in just very general shapes for the features, right? You want specificity, but at the same time, you're really just trying to lay in an idea of what you see, right? So I've got his eyebrow here. And this is a 2B pencil, right? So it's not too dark and not too light either. The good thing about this kind of continuous line drawing, right? It's a little bit more of kind of a scribble drawing. You can start really building up the tones that you see, kind of working around your map and really vary your pressure that you have, working in some of those deep lines. Kind of working in part of the eye. And of course, you know, portraiture takes practice, right? So if your first couple portraits look absolutely not quite like the reference, that's okay, right? You'll get better at it. It'll get easier. This is more just about the process of kind of working through portraiture without having it be too, how do I put this? Too sensitive, right? I feel like as people, we always kind of think portraiture, it has to be perfect the first time. That's just not realistic. All right. So kind of still working section to section, really trying to build up my tone here. I can move down the brim of my hat. Notice too, like very little have I picked up my pencil. Oh, made a hole through the newsprint. but I'm really trying to get a sense of how this portrait comes about, right? Really trying to move through the composition, capturing key elements of the details without getting locked down to too many specifics. Of course, too, varying your pressure is key, because you can start building up some of those lighter gestural tones. And then, of course, while this is continuous tone, you can switch. This is a little bit more fluid of a graphite tool for me. You can switch to different kind of tools, different weights to help you kind of achieve the value that you're looking for. Working through the big smile here. Get more of this side of the nose. And you'll see as you work with this continuous line, it gives you a lot more freedom to really just experiment with gesture while simultaneously building up tone. But then hopefully the goal is to get you a little bit more loose. So when you approach portraiture, it doesn't have to be that quite perfect thing from the start, right? You're just kind of really experimenting with what you can do as far as like building up tone, but also being a little bit more abstracted and expressive. I am looking for my 9B graphite pencil, something a little bit more dark to really pop this chin out. And I think the recommendation I have as far as like the time limit on these is about, I want to say 20 to 30 minutes, right? That's great if you can get this done in 20 to 30 minutes. It would probably take me a little bit longer to kind of really fully realize exactly what I want, but know that you can kind of stop after that. This is more about the process and the learning instead of having it be absolutely perfect. All right, so I'm going to work in a little bit of the ear side hair. This actually comes down a lot more further. So I'm going to work out that brim. There we go. A little bit better with the hat. For demonstration purposes, I'm gonna call this done in about 30 seconds. Just so you're not watching like a 2-hour long video of me working through each drawing. All right, so idea of figure, there is some proportional things that I could go back and fix, of course. I feel like every drawing, there's always like, oh, I could do this one other thing. But one way of approaching portraiture, right? Especially in that other video that I've posted to the Canvas page that demonstrates another artist kind of laying out not only the figure gesturally, but the tone as well. The more that you work with this continuous line method of doing portraiture, you're just going to get faster at laying in proportions. You're going to be able to pull out specific details of a specific person instead of having your figures look kind of uncharacteristic or like a little too similar when you do them, right? So another way to kind of approach this, we still have this kind of similar layout, your gesture drawing first, is to really kind of switch gears and think about bringing out very key, thick shapes and lines to help define a portrait. So this is going to probably be a little bit more abstracted. I've got a little bit of compressed charcoal and a little bit of Conte Crown. Let's see if I can pull out a piece of vine charcoal as well. A tool that's really helpful for this is like fluid ink, any kind of watercolor, any kind of gouache, right? Because the painted mark lends really nicely to kind of looking specifically for, you know, key things that can help bring out the essence of what you see, right? So I'm going to kind of gently lay in, just really thinking, slowing down my process to a more contour-based way here. I'm going to bring out just a few key elements. It's my eye line. Kind of just lay in the general idea of some of the features, just so I have a little bit of a map. Now I'm probably going to end up covering this up with my marks and losing some of these details, but just so you kind of have a general sense of the proportions. Of course, Sam Neill has a very unique kind of facial structure as far as the wrinkles from this movie. When you're selecting your references, please feel free to pull from kind of like any digital reference that you want, right? It can be a picture you've taken. Those are always like the preferred thing. But it can also be like someone that you're just like fond of. Maybe it's an actor, maybe it's someone who inspires you, maybe you just pulled a random image off the internet. That's all fine, right? All right. Kind of gently laid in a little bit of this kind of portraiture. I'm just going to work in a little bit more of the neck here. I know the collar kind of works that and covers it up a little bit. But just so I have a guideline, right? So with this kind of singular mark, it's going to go a little bit back to our mark making. I'm going to look for those specific kind of marks and shapes that I can pull out to kind of define a very simplistic version of what I see, right? So I always like to start with ones that have key shadows, and of course the chin line is a great place to start. So with this kind of drawing, you're gonna be a little bit more methodical with what you bring out. It's not gonna be that kind of rapid, let's lay in tone, just get it done. You're just gonna have to pick and choose, like, okay, maybe this is a key mark for me, right? And it's gonna be a little subjective. So I'm going to bring out this shape too by the eye. So it's a little linear, a little bit more kind of based in value and bringing out those key tones. And the whole point of doing this kind of like singular, let's do a few lines, is that I want you to really experiment not only with contour in your portraiture and not relying on value to kind of bring out everything, but just experimenting with that expressive quality of like having a little bit thicker lines and shapes. I feel like the brim of the hat is always key. I'm gonna make that a pretty decent swoop. Same thing with the back part of the hat, comes behind the ear. Right, and this little bit of shadow here, really kind of deepen that edge. So you can see that this process, while it will be definitely harder to get a true likeness to the character, you're really thinking about how are these lines going to be the most impactful? How can I really capture the essence of this person as minimally as possible? Right, so maybe with this one, bring out that shape underneath the nose. And of course, the very intense smile. This is definitely a video where I'm going to talk a little bit less, because this takes all of my concentration. To be honest with you, when I do portraiture, it's a lot more brain power for me, as I'm sure it might be for you guys as well. Of course, I really want to capture that kind of turned down part of this eye over here, right, where we have all of these nice, lovely, lived a hard life, or not even a hard life, just a fun life, kind of wrinkles on the face. Right. So again, definitely much different than the kind of more tonal application I was doing in the first one. But you can see, like, just by pulling these kind of marks, you can really get a sense of a character, right, or a person. And it allows you to play more with just like, okay, what can I do with my material? How can I make it more expressive? How can I make it more interesting? And just have like that impression. This kind of method too, I feel like is great if you do want to do a lot with building up the surrounding space. So let's say I did want to have a very dark, rich background. Maybe I'm going to do texture in the background. Maybe I'm going to do a collage moment, right? Kind of capture the essence of the movie. It allows for that, right? Where you have these just kind of like key elements for the line work and bring out the portraiture, but then you have all that freedom to kind of play with other types of rendering and the expressive quality. The last one I'm going to kind of focus on here, I'm going to lay in a little bit, just like I did with the last one, a little bit of a foundation for the actual structure of the face. So we have the hat here. I like to start with the hat. It's kind of a nice key indicator. And of course this one, yeah, you can kind of revert back to your gesture drawing, kind of building up that sense of what the portrait actually looks like, kind of working that general to specific. You'll notice too that the more studies that you do, I'm asking you guys to do 4 studies, right? At least with this assignment, is that you're going to be able to kind of get quicker and quicker with each one. The more that you draw that kind of from that single reference, it's going to be a lot easier to kind of lay in the thing that you just drew, but kind of using a different approach, right? So hopefully that is the case for you. Definitely seems to be a little bit of the case for me. Though I am going to kind of ignore the ears still because I really don't feel like drawing that. Okay, so we have a general guideline. I do need to drop the hat down a little bit more. A few of those forehead wrinkles. Work in some kind of map for our eyebrows, right? So this one can definitely be a combination of more of like the linear style of the one that I just did versus that kind of continuous tone, like let's map out some of the general values. What I want you to focus on though, when you feel like you have a decent part of the structure, right? I'm gonna kind of start in this area of the face where the cheeks are. I really want you to think about bringing out the planes of value that help pop out the underlying anatomy, right? So while I'm using charcoal, doesn't mean that you can't use a wider piece of graphite. You can use your Conte crown, you can use like oil pastel, chalk pastel, anything like that, right? Graphite works great for this, I want to be honest with you. But you're really trying to focus on bringing out the planes of value that help define the structure of the face. And when you're looking at a 2D image, this can be a little tricky, but it's going to help pop things forward, right? So kind of looking underneath the lip, we have this kind of little bit of this divot underneath the lip. That I feel like that one's a key one, and especially underneath the nose. Just trying to build up those planes of value that are really going to help pop things forward. When you're talking about this intersection between where the nose connects to the face, maybe I am kind of pulling in a general tone, but making this kind of little bit more of a like, I don't want to say divot, but like little mark underneath the eye for that underneath eye to really help pop that kind of part of the under eyelid that contains the eye forward, usually gets the highlight, versus kind of pulling in a little bit darker tone to kind of round out the apex of the cheeks. So you're really trying to focus on developing this in a kind of plainer way. Yes, you can switch to a little bit darker of a material, right? Especially when you're kind of thinking about that shadow, but bringing out the kind of not only values of the face, but also just the planar aspect. And the nose is definitely a good one, right? Because it can be really hard to shade noses. I'm just gonna soften that up a little bit. Got a little too heavy-handed. It can be really hard to shade noses because they are more triangular, right? And it can be really hard to define them. So really kind of looking about how can I bring out a plane of value that's gonna kind of lift that nose off the ground, right? And how can I kind of bring out that value where I still have this section of the nose that gets that highlight. Definitely think about how you can also erase back in to kind of bring out planes of value as well, right? So just really think about how you can pull your marks and your tonal shapes in a way that kind of starts to push and pull the underlying anatomy of the face. So this is a good one too, especially if you're working with soft material, to kind of lay in some tone and then think about how you can bring out the darker parts, right? To kind of really pull in some of those deeper shadows and kind of round out the structure of the face. How maybe I can kind of push and pull and soften in areas to kind of get a more rounded feel. But then also how I can race those highlights back in to kind of help create more of those apexes of the cheeks, right? So you really want to focus on, okay, how can I really bring out the shapes of value in a way that really pulls out the structure of the face. And it's a lot easier said than done, right? So again, this one's gonna be a little bit more of a combination of both, where you are trying to kind of use more of a pulling motion, right? And kind of building up your little tonal blocks in a way that helps kind of create those faceted planes to where you get more of that dimensional structure of the figure. If that makes sense. I hope it makes sense. All right. Of course, the very last one, right, as you kind of still play around with building up and looking for those planes of value, those shapes that really make a difference, right, especially with this one, where the eyebrow, I'm gonna make the eyebrow a little dark here, really does come in line with that eyelid to where it's almost, you don't even see the above part of the eyelid, right? So kind of really deepening that is not only get more of the value that's actually in because he has that hat on, but it's also going to help me kind of get a better likeness to where my reference actually looks like. But as you kind of work through these, of course, definitely encourage you play with that mixed media, right? If you've got charcoal pencils, those are always really good if you're working with this soft material to kind of revert back and start to play with adding them with those fine line details, right? And kind of building out maybe those moments that are a little too detailed and kind of fine for your fatter pieces of charcoal or your larger pieces of charcoal. But also with that last one, I really want you to experiment with figure drawing in a way that aligns more with your personal aesthetic, right? So this last one is completely free. You can take some of the things that you might have found that you liked in these last three and apply them. But I really want you to use that as an opportunity to not only flex your figure drawing skills a little bit more, but just show me more of your personal aesthetic.